The call came into the executive floor at 11 in the morning, and within 10 minutes it had emptied 3 calendars. Daniel Cho had worked under Arthur Vane for 6 years. In all that time, he had never once seen the old man cancel a board meeting to look at a photograph. "Get me Whitmore," Vane said, not looking up from the screen. His voice was steady, but his hand wasn't. Now, the photograph was nothing. A grainy still pulled from a local news segment out of a small town 3 hours north. Some piece about a community fundraiser for a flooded elementary school. In the background, half out of focus, a man in a gray work shirt knelt beside a pickup truck, a torque wrench in his hand, a little girl in rain boots holding a flashlight steady for him. Daniel didn't understand the urgency until Vane turned the monitor toward him and zoomed in on the man's face. "That's him," Vane said. "That's Russ Calloway." Daniel had been at Vane Dynamics long enough to know the name. Everyone in the company's engineering division knew the name, the way you know a ghost story. Russ Calloway was the engineer who, 31 years ago, had drawn the first working sketch of the regenerative drive system that now sat at the heart of every vehicle the company built. The patent that had made Arthur Vane a billionaire 11 times over carried only one name on it. It wasn't Calloway's. "Sir," Daniel said carefully, "I thought." The file said he passed away. "There was a settlement a long time ago, before either of our times. The file is wrong," Vane said. "I made sure the file was wrong. I told people he was dead because it was easier than telling them what I actually did." He set the tablet down, and for the first time in 6 years, Daniel saw something in Arthur Vane's face that looked like fear. "Find out where that town is. We're going today." 3 hours north, in a town called Ferris Hollow, Russ Calloway was under a Honda Civic with a stuck caliper, and he did not look up when the long black SUV pulled into the gravel lot of Calloway's garage and tire. "We're closing in 20 minutes, he called out from beneath the car. "If it's not an emergency, tomorrow's better." "It's an emergency," said a voice he hadn't heard in 3 decades. Russ rolled out from under the Civic on the creeper, wiped his hands on a rag, and looked up at Arthur Vane standing in the doorway of his garage, flanked by 2 men in suits, who looked deeply uncomfortable to be standing on oil-stained concrete. For a long moment, neither man said anything. Russ's daughter, Birdie, 11 years old, missing a front tooth, still in her rain boots from the morning's job, stepped out from behind the parts counter holding a clipboard because she'd been helping her dad with intake all summer. She looked between the 2 men, sensing immediately that something had shifted in the air, the way kids always do. "Dad," she said. "Do you know him?" "I used to," Russ said. What Birdie didn't know, what almost no one in Ferris Hollow knew, was that her father had once been considered one of the most promising young propulsion engineers in the country. 31 years ago, Russ Calloway had been 26 years old, 6 months from finishing his master's thesis, and working nights in a converted garage lab for a startup called Vane Motors, founded by a charismatic 29-year-old named Arthur Vane, who talked like he'd already won. Russ had built the first working prototype of the regenerative drive system on his own time, on his own dime, using parts he'd scavenged from a junkyard because the company couldn't afford new ones. He'd shown it to Arthur on a Tuesday night in March. Arthur had been electrified. He'd shaken Russ's hand and called him a genius and promised him the moon. 3 weeks later, Russ's wife had a medical emergency, a sudden frightening one, the kind that meant Russ needed to be at the hospital, not the lab. He told Arthur he needed 2 weeks. Arthur told him to take the time he needed. When Russ came back, his badge didn't work. His lab access was gone, and the patent application for the regenerative drive, filed 11 days into Russ's absence, listed exactly one inventor, Arthur Vane. Russ had a lawyer for about 4 months. He had almost no money, a wife who needed care, and a company with infinite resources and a legal team built for exactly this situation. The settlement, when it came, was a small one-time payment and a non-disclosure agreement that Russ signed because his wife needed the surgery, and he needed to eat. He moved 3 hours north. He never told anyone the real story, not his second wife, not his daughter, not a single soul in Ferris Hollow. He opened a garage. He fixed cars. He raised his daughter alone after his second wife passed when Birdie was 4, and he built her a life with grease under his fingernails and Sunday pancakes, and absolutely nothing else to show for the most important 6 months of his professional life. He had told himself for 31 years that he had made peace with it. Standing in his own garage doorway looking at Arthur Vane, he discovered that wasn't entirely true. You have 90 seconds, Russ said, before I ask you to leave. I saw your face in a news clip this morning, Arthur said. His voice cracked slightly, and Daniel Cho, standing behind him, had genuinely never heard that happen before. I thought you were dead, Russ. I told everyone you were dead. I told myself you were dead, because it was easier than knowing you were out here somewhere, alive, and that you stole 11 years of my life and an idea that built your entire company, Russ said. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Yes. I'm aware of what you did, Arthur. I've had 31 years to be aware of it. Bertie's eyes went wide. She set the clipboard down very slowly. I was 29, Arthur said. I was scared the board would pull funding if they thought the breakthrough belonged to someone they could lose. I told myself it was temporary, that I'd fix it, give you co-credit later, bring you back in. And then a week became a month became, I didn't fix it. I let it become permanent, because fixing it meant admitting what I'd done, and the longer I waited, the more it would have cost me. Every year I didn't fix it, the company got bigger, and the lie got bigger with it, until I was the company, and there was no version of the truth that didn't end my career and probably land me in a courtroom. So you buried it, Russ said. I buried it, Arthur said, and I have thought about you, about this, nearly every single day for 31 years, every shareholder meeting, every award, every interview where someone asks me about my breakthrough moment, and I have to smile and tell a story about a Tuesday night that was never mine to tell. He looked down at his own hands. My therapist calls it my unfinished business. I call it the thing I did that I can never undo. To a man I told myself did so, I wouldn't have to live with having ruined him. Russ was quiet for a moment. I'm not ruined, Arthur, he said. Look around. I've got a good garage, a town that trusts me, and the best kid in the county standing right there. He nodded toward Bertie. You didn't ruin me. You took something from me, and it cost me a hard decade, and I'm not going to pretend it didn't. But I built a life. It's just not the life you took. I know, Arthur said, and I'm not here to fix 31 years with an apology in a parking lot. I know that's not how this works, but I came because I needed you to know. I needed one person on earth to know that I know what I did, and because he stopped, and for a moment looked less like a billionaire and more like a tired man standing on cracked concrete, because the patent is up for a defensive renewal, filing next month, and for the first time in 31 years, I have a choice about whose name goes on it, and I want to make the right one, if you'll let me. Bertie looked at her father. Dad, she said slowly, is this man saying you invented the thing his whole company is built on? That's what he's saying, Russ said. And he's been lying about it for longer than I've been alive. That's also what he's saying. Bertie considered this with the gravity of an 11-year-old who had just learned her father was, in some way she didn't fully have words for yet, a secret genius. Are you going to yell at him? She asked. No, Russ said. Yelling never fixed an engine, and it's not going to fix this either. Daniel Cho, who had said nothing this entire time, found himself oddly moved by that. He'd spent 6 years in rooms where the loudest, angriest voice usually won. He was watching a man with every right to be furious choose, instead, to be steady, and watching it land harder than any shouting match he'd ever witnessed. It didn't happen instantly. Nothing that mattered ever does. But 3 weeks later, Vane Dynamics filed an amended patent record, a quiet legal correction, the kind that makes the news only if someone's looking for it, restoring the regenerative drive's original inventor record to list 2 names, Arthur J. Vane and Russell T. Callaway. A week after that, Arthur Vane stood in front of the company's annual engineering symposium, 3,000 engineers in a packed auditorium, and told them the true story of a Tuesday night 31 years ago, leaving nothing out. He named what he'd done. He named the cost. And he announced the creation of the Callaway Fellowship, a fully funded engineering scholarship for first-generation students, seeded with a sum that made the front row go very still. He did not ask Russ to come to the symposium. He knew better than to make this about a spectacle. What he did instead, what mattered more, was quieter. Vane Dynamics' regional service network had for years been looking to bring small independent shops into a certified partner program. Better parts pricing, factory training, steady contract work. Callaway's Garage and Tire received an invitation like any other shop might, except this. One came with a personal note from Arthur Vane that said only, "Your call, no pressure, no strings. AV." Russ read it twice at his kitchen table that night, with Bertie doing homework across from him. Is that the apology man again? She asked. not looking up from her math. Sort of, Russ said. Are you gonna say yes? Russ looked around his small kitchen, at the calendar on the wall with Bertie's softball schedule, at the drawing she'd made of the garage taped to the fridge, at the life he'd built with his own 2 hands, out of what was left after everything else had been taken. I think I might, he said. Not for him, for you. Steady work, good training, that's not nothing. Bertie nodded like that settled it, the way kids do, and went back to her fractions. 6 months later, the sign outside Callaway's Garage and Tire had a new addition, a small certified partner plaque, factory blue, bolted neatly beside the old hand-painted one Russ had made himself 20 years ago. He'd refused to take the old one down. The new plaque just sat beside it, the way the truth could sit beside the life he'd already built, without erasing any of it. Daniel Cho drove up from the city sometimes, on his own time, not on the company's. He'd grown fond of the garage, of the steady rhythm of the place, of the way Russ explained a torque spec to a 16-year-old apprentice, with the same patience he'd once have used on a research team. Daniel had started, almost without meaning to, learning things from Russ that no business school had ever taught him, about what it actually cost a person to keep their composure for 31 years. And what it meant that, given the chance to be vindicated loudly, Russ had chosen instead to be vindicated quietly and to let the rest of his life simply continue. One Saturday afternoon, Daniel found Bertie in the garage's small office, carefully rehanging a framed copy of the amended patent record, the one with both names on it now, in a spot of honor beside her mother's photograph and a crayon drawing she'd made years ago of Dad's garage, with a rocket on it, because Dad is smart enough to build rockets too. He never told anyone, you know, she said, smoothing the frame straight. Not even me, for my whole life. Why do you think that is? Daniel asked. Bertie thought about it the way her father thought about things, slowly, and like the answer mattered. I think, she said finally, he didn't need anyone to know he was smart. He just needed me to have a good life. And I do. She stepped back to admire the wall. But I think it's nice that people know now anyway. Because he is smart. And he's also the best dad in Ferris Hollow. And now both things get to be true out loud. Outside, through the office window, Russ Callaway was teaching the apprentice how to bleed a brake line, his hands sure and unhurried, exactly the way they'd always been, long before the world had taken anything from him, and long after it had, at last, quietly given something back.